Well, hey, y'all, we're going to continue our relational series tonight with a topic that we've never really done in this format. And so my goal is to give you a ton of time in small groups to talk about this. We're going to talk about your parents. Whenever we talk about relationships, I always kind of expect that y'all are going to want to talk about like friendships, dating relationships, and that kind of stuff, which is fair. But what always surprises me is how one of the most common things I hear you say you want to talk about is your relationships with your parents. And I just want to acknowledge before we go any further, like, if we were to have everybody speak very honestly about how they experience their parents, we would have a really diverse set of experiences. Some of you have absolute rock star parents. Some of you have parents and you just feel incredible with them. Like some of you have the parents where it was like the moment you were born, they were like, it's my purpose on this earth to bear God's undying love for you. And even today, you're like, man, I love being at youth group, but I can't wait to get home to my parents. I'm overstating it. But some of you love your parents. You have great relationships with them. Some of you have the opposite experience. Some of you have awful relationships with your parents. Some of you have parents who have betrayed you. You have parents who have left you. Some of you have lost parents. Some of you have people who you call mom and dad right now that might not be your biological parents. And some of you just have brutal experiences with your parents. Some of you have parents who are always angry with you. Some of you have parents who are always deeply disappointed with you. Some of you have parents where you genuinely cannot tell if they care about you at all. And if that's the case, I want to say I'm so sorry. I have talked to way too many students who feel that way. And as much as I want to stand up here and say, like, without a doubt, like, all of your parents, like, you should just believe the best in them. They're probably doing the best they can. That's just not always true. And if you're in the room and you just feel like everyone has a better relationship with their parents than you do, I just want to acknowledge that and give space for that and not like talk down to you and tell you to fix your thinking, but just to say I'm sorry. And do want to stop here before we keep going and say, if you feel unsafe in your home, like if your parents are physically, emotionally, sexually abusive, or if they're neglectful of you, please talk to an adult before you leave tonight. It's something that sadly we're pretty experienced with, and we'd love to come alongside you and help you. And so some of you have the extremes of the experience. Some of you have parents and you're just like, these people are the greatest people on the planet. Some of you have awful parents and you're like, I cannot wait until my high school graduation where I can finally get away from them. But most of you, not all of you, but most of you kind of fall in the middle. And most of you have parents where you would probably say, I think I have good parents, but I think I have good parents. Like, I know my parents love me, but I just don't feel super connected to them. Or I know my parents love me and care about me, but it just feels like they're disappointed in me like a lot of the time. Or I know my parents love me, but they kind of just tell me what to do, and there's not much emotional connection. Or some of you are like, yeah, I love my parents. They're just not around that much. Like, it's not like they're deadbeats and they're gone all the time, but you're just like, they work so much, and when they're home, they're just kind of on their phone or doing something else, and we never really connect. Some of you are like, yeah, I have good parents. They're just kind of emotionally unavailable sometimes. The thing I hear most from you and from students over the years is I feel like my relationship with my parents is okay, but I just feel like they don't really get me. And you don't want to acknowledge I kind of feel that way. I've deeply felt that way in my life. Like, I feel like I have good parents. I feel like they love me and they like me, but they just don't see me. They just don't get, like, they don't seem to understand me fully. Maybe it's because they just don't care deeply about what you care about, or they just don't quite understand the things you're passionate about, or maybe it has to do with your faith. Maybe your parents aren't followers of Jesus, or they say they are, but it's not really there, and for you it matters a ton, and they just don't quite get that. And so if you're in the room tonight and you're in that very large camp of like, man, I like my parents, they're good parents, I just don't think they get me. I don't think they see me. What I want to offer to you, and we're about to get into some super practical stuff in the Bible that I think gives a ton of helpful shape to actually how to follow Jesus, like in a relationship with your parents. But before we get there, the one story I want to make sure I bring up, there's a story in the Old Testament of a young Egyptian slave woman named Hagar. And she is kind of sold to a family that doesn't see her whatsoever. And when you read her story, what you notice is that her new family that she's just kind of dropped in, they never use her name. They might as well not know it. They talk about her, they have conversations about her, but they never use her name. Finally, she is so wounded by being invisible and unseen that she just like runs away, which I don't recommend you do unless you're unsafe. She runs away. God meets with her, and the first thing he says to her is her name. The first thing he says to her is, Hagar, what are you doing here? And I think that story is a pretty powerful word for those of you who feel unseen and unknown by your parents. It's probably not the case that you have bad parents. It's just the case they might not get you or see you as deeply as you would want or in the exact way that you'd like. What I would say to you is nothing to fix your relationship with your parents. What I would just want to declare over you before we go any further is you have a Father in heaven who sees you and knows your name. You have a Father in heaven who sees you and knows your name. I don't think it's an accident or a coincidence that in the Bible, God is often called a father. I think the Bible is pretty realistic and it understands that your relationship with your earthly parents might not check every box you want it to, even if they're lovely people. And so what the Bible does by calling God Father is it says, hey, we recognize that parent relationships are complicated and layered, and they're so tricky to work out sometimes. You have a heavenly Father who sees you and knows your name. Just want to do that before we go any further. What I want to do is I want to dive into actually how the Bible talks about like being a child of a parent. Because what I've found is the way the Bible handles this is actually extremely helpful. And so what I want you to expect in this is not a bunch of like, here's how you should behave with your parents. I'm assuming you have enough of that in your head already. What we're going to talk about is how you actually practically follow Jesus in a relationship with your parents and how to like be a person in that relationship. Sound good? Great. There are two specific commands in the Bible about how to act with your parents or how to behave with your parents. One is temporary, one is permanent. Does anyone know what they are? Anyone know? There's one in the New Testament where it's to obey your parents. That's the temporary one. And there's one in the Old Testament in the 10 Commandments that is to honor your parents. Let's start with the first one, the obedience one. In Ephesians, Paul says, children, obey your parents. What I want to name about that, we're going to spend almost no time on the obedience thing because I'm assuming that's enough on your mind. What Paul is saying is he's saying this. This is a temporary command given to children, which means this. The day is coming when obey your parents is not really a command that's given directly to you. The day is coming where the whole like obey your parents command applies less and less and less to you. And everyone said hallelujah. Right? In fact, most of you, like, if you're moving out of your parents' home in a couple years and a few years after that, you might be financially independent, not living with them anymore. That command, that goes away fairly soon. The one that's permanent is honor your father and mother. And so it comes from the 10 Commandments, and the scene that you're probably all very familiar with is Moses goes up a mountain, he meets with God, smashes the first set of 10 Commandments, gets a new set, comes back down the mountain, and he gives all of Israel 10 Commandments, kind of like a bill of rights on how to be human. And one of those commandments is honor your father and mother. And the weird thing about this is when Moses delivers these commandments, who's present? Everybody. It's not just children. The command to honor your father and mother is not just given to children, it's given to every living person. There's something about it that is permanent. It's forever. And so I want to be very, very clear about this. The primary thing you owe your parents is honor. The primary thing you owe your parents is honor. But I want to talk about what honor actually is. Because I think when we hear honor, we have the wrong ideas in our head. I think when we hear honor, we think of just like looking at our parents, smiling a lot, and being like, you are the best parent in the whole world, and I love everything about you. That's not what honor is. Honor is way more useful of an idea. If you look at the Hebrew word behind honor, it's the word kavod, and it's a word that literally means heaviness. And so when the Bible says honor, what it's saying is weight. It's the same word that we use for dignity. It's the same word that we use for worthiness. It's the same word that we use for glory. There is a weightiness when the Bible says honor. And so when the Bible says honor your father and mother, it's not saying be super fond of them all the time. It's saying recognize that their role has a ton of weight in your life, whether they are a good parent or a bad parent. When the Bible says honor your father and mother, it's basically saying this: recognize that the role of your parents in your life is going to have a massive influence on you. Recognize that you have parents or a parent, and their role in your life is going to be very, very, very important. It's going to weigh a lot for you. Here's the way I understand honor. I understand honor as accepting the reality of someone's role in your life and giving them the space to hold it. Accepting the reality of someone's role in your life and giving them the space to hold it. I think about an example I love to use for this. Any Zach Bryan fans in the room? Anyone remember when he got arrested? If you haven't seen the video, he gets like pulled over by a cop, and like he's just like blatantly not listening to the cop. Like it's just like a weird video, but the cop is like, if you keep acting like this, so disrespectful, I'm going to arrest you. And Zach Bryan is just like, okay, here we go. And then he gets arrested. And then right afterwards, he's like, man, I'm sorry. Like, this is the dumbest video. That's a beautiful, and I love Zach Bryan, to be clear, but that's a beautiful example of the opposite of honor. Like, in that moment, Zach Bryan got arrested because he did not accept the reality of that police officer's authority. And he did not give that police officer any space to actually be a police officer, right? It's what honor is. It's accepting the reality of someone's role in your life and giving them the space to carry out their role. It's like, I'm not going to waste my energy on trying to challenge your authority. I'm just going to let you be within the role you're in. And what I think we need to name here, honor is not faking it. Honor is naming reality. Honor is not faking fondness towards your parents. When the Bible says honor your father and mother, it's not saying pretend that you think they're the best. It's not saying be your parents' biggest fans. It's saying accept reality. Stop wasting all of your energy just in trying to challenge your parents' authority. Put your energy just towards naming reality of like, hey, these are the parents I have. The people in my life who are going to hold the role of parent for me are these people. As weird as it sounds, when you have a difficult relationship with your parents, one of the things you've probably struggled to do is accept the fact that they are your parents. Or to accept the fact that, like, these people who you might not be super fond of right now, they are the people that God has put in your life as your parents. And for some of you, and you're asking like, well, why did God choose them? I don't know. Honor is about accepting reality. It's about naming reality, saying, in my family, those are my parents, and I am the child, and I am just going to live in that reality. It doesn't mean you're going to fake fondness. It doesn't mean that you just smile at your parents all the time. But it does mean like, hey, I recognize that you have a role in my life, and I'm not going to try to overthrow you. Honor sounds like this. I choose to acknowledge the roles that we actually hold and to not waste my energy trying to overthrow your role in my life. Has anyone ever been like in a class and there's like one student who's just like kind of needling the teacher constantly? Like they're just trying to bug the teacher over and over and over again, and you can see the teacher getting more, maybe it's you, but you can see the teacher getting like more and more annoyed. And they're just like, little Bobby, if you have a friend named Bobby, I'm sorry. Little Bobby, if you keep doing this, you're gonna get in trouble. And he just like keeps doing it. And like half of you is like, well, at least this isn't boring. But the other half of you is like, dude, what are you doing? Like what victory do you have to win here? And he just keeps going, then he finally gets himself like sent out of the room, and you're like, how did you think that was gonna end for you? Life with your parents can be kind of similar. Honor is naming the roles you and your parents have and saying, hey, I'm going to put my energy into just being a healthy, faithful person. I'm not going to waste my energy trying to challenge your authority, even if I don't think you're a great parent, even if you've hurt me, even if I don't feel like you get me. I'm not going to waste my energy trying to change you. I'm going to sink all of my energy just into holding the role I actually have in this world. Honor is not a way of just being super passive and saying, yeah, it is what it is. It's a way of saying, this is reality right now. This is the reality that I'm living in, and I'm going to choose to actually live in it. Honor also sounds like this. I put my energy towards carrying out my role faithfully, not challenging yours. Last week, Dane spoke, and he talked a lot about a parable Jesus uses where he talks about taking the log out of your eye before the speck in someone else's. And what I loved what he said about that was that often we waste our energy trying to fix other people or change other people when there's stuff in our own soul that the Spirit is inviting us to do. I want to be really, really clear. Some of you have jacked up relationships with your parents. Some of you have rough relationships with your parents. And some of you just don't feel seen by your parents. But if you waste all of your energy trying to change them, if you waste all of your energy trying to resist their authority, you're probably missing some stuff that the Spirit's doing in your soul. God probably wants to meet with you in your real life. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't speak up. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be honest with your parents and tell them when you're hurt. Please do that. But I'm saying if you're spending all of your energy putting up a fight against their authority, what are you gaining? Like truly, what are you gaining? You're not gaining much. You're probably just missing the stuff that's going on in your own soul. I think of it this way. In Ecclesiastes 5, the author says, don't be quick with your mouth. Don't be hasty in your heart to utter anything before God. Here it is. God is in heaven and you are on earth, so let your words be few. I'm not saying the let your words be few part should apply to you with your parents. I'm just saying, notice the honor there. You see it? God is in heaven. I am on earth. There is something about that. That's not meant to be defeating. It's meant to get you to live in reality. Of you to say, like, here's the present reality about things. And so, friends, what I want to kind of offer to you before we get really practical with your parents, regardless of what relationship you have with your parents, regardless whether it's absolutely wonderful or if it's terrible or if it's somewhere in the middle, honor is always an option. Not just because you should, but because when you make honor like your operating system with your parents, when you make that a priority for you, it's not about being defeated by your parents. It's about saying, I'm going to stop wasting my energy trying to resist you. I'm going to put my energy into what our roles actually are. I'm just going to try to live as faithfully as I can as your child. Won't fix your relationship with your parents, but it is how we walk with Jesus within difficult relationships with our parents. And I'll tell you right now, this is not work that you do as a high schooler that goes away when you hit college. Like, your relationship with your parents will be something you constantly revisit throughout your entire life. I was just telling Fiona today, it's really funny. Whenever like someone my age like asks to get coffee or lunch with me, and they want to like talk about something, it's like a 75% chance they want to talk about their parents as like a 31-year-old, which is always, a while ago, I think that would have been funny to me. I'm like, dude, you don't even live with your parents. You have your own kids. Why are you thinking about your parents? It's because you're constantly working out what it looks like to relate to your parents. So friends, I'd encourage you, regardless of what your relationship with your parents is like, honor is always an option, and it's a freeing way for you to live. I'm not just saying this as I want you guys to be good kids to your parents. I'm saying it like, stop fighting a war you're going to lose. Stop trying to change them. Start pouring all of your energy into like, okay, how do I be me as a person in this relationship? So what I want to land the plane with is 4 ways to get honor lived in your relationship with your parents. And I want to be clear, none of these are easy. But if you've got a difficult relationship with your parents and you think there's a possibility it could grow into a healthier place over time, these are gold. These are how you grow a healthier relationship with your parents, if there's a potential for it to grow. And if there's not, at the very least, these are solid ways that your soul becomes more formed like Jesus. If you're in a brutal relationship with your parents and you are so hurt and so wounded and they are so awful to you, what Jesus offers you probably is not a fixed relationship. What he offers you is your soul becoming more like him. This is kind of how you do it. Number 1, with getting honor lived. When your parents give you advice, hear them out and genuinely consider it as an option. When your parents give you advice, hear them out and consider their advice as a genuine option in your life. I'm not saying you have to take their advice. I'm not saying you have, like, when they're like, well, when I was your age, you don't have to take everything they're handing to you as advice. What I am saying is, do you genuinely consider their advice? Like when they say, like, well, what I think you should do is this. Do you flippantly disregard it? Because you're like, you just don't see me or get me. Or do you genuinely consider it? Not saying you'll do it, but be like, I wonder if that would work. At least for me, I always did the first thing. Like, I rarely genuinely considered my parents' advice, and I kind of wish I had. Because what I realize now is when your parent gives you advice, most of the time, they're not trying to force you to live a certain way. They are trying to like do their parent job well. When your parents give you advice, most of the time, they are just trying to be a decent parent. And so a way of showing them honor is by genuinely weighing the advice they give you. Doesn't mean you have to go and live it out, but it means that you consider it as a genuine option. One of the best things you can say to your parents when they give you advice, if you look at them and you say, you know, I'm going to genuinely consider that. Thank you. And then end the conversation, that will probably mean the world to them. Like, that shows them honor, right? It respects their role as your parent, but you are still a person. You still have the freedom to choose how to live your life, but you're saying, yeah, I will genuinely take your advice and consider it and talk about it with you. Second thing, be curious about the person behind the role. At grad banquets, I often make the joke that the biggest secret about parents is that they're people. The biggest secret about parents is that they are persons. That means they have beliefs, they have doubts, they have insecurities, they have backstories, they have dreams, they have everything going on in them. One of the things I think, and speaking of myself as a high schooler, I did is I saw my parents as my parents, and it wasn't until a little bit later in my life that I saw them as like persons, like with stories. One of the most impactful things I ever did um, is in a class at school for grad school. I had to create what's called a genogram. It's like a family tree that goes generations back, and you fill it with notes, like about everyone in the family. Like you note addictions, secrets, grudges, religion, social dynamics. Like you mark up the whole thing. And what I ended up realizing is I'm like, oh my goodness, for like 4 generations, like my dad is the only male in my family who did not physically abuse his children. Like he and me are the only ones. And that was shocking to me. And so what it helped me do is it helped me have a ton of empathy for my dad at that point, who I had a very difficult relationship with. Didn't fix our relationship, but when I was able to empathize with him, it made honor a heck of a lot easier. If you're struggling with honoring your parents, a good starting place is empathy. Like if you've got the relationship with your parents to do this, like if it's safe, sit down with them and you say like, "Hey, like what was your childhood like?" It sounds goofy and weird, but it builds up your empathy for them and it makes honor a lot less uncomfortable. Third thing, focus on your role in the family. If you find yourself just fixated on like, man, my parents are not the parents I want, or like I don't have the dad I want, or I don't have the mom I want, or I really hate how my dad treats me, or whatever it is, create space for that kind of processing. Be honest, but focus a ton on your role. One of the best prayers you can pray to God is like, God, in this circumstance, how would you have me live? How would you have me navigate a difficult circumstance? Like, you are a God who sees me and knows me. You know my name. How can I rest in that more thoroughly and show honor to my parents, even when it's like, how can I do my role well? Don't get so distracted by how you wish your parents were different that you get super passive with who you actually are. Don't get so distracted with trying to fix or change your parents that you just stop taking any responsibility for how you're living your life. That's what's going to stick with you. Finally, fourth thing, take up your frustrations with God. If you're frustrated that you have the parents you do, and some of you definitely are, maybe you don't even maybe it's not to the level of like, I wish they weren't my parent, but maybe it's just like, man, I wish I had a dad who was more emotionally in touch with me. I wish I had a mom who was more gracious. I wish I had parents who cared more about what I care about. I wish I had parents who followed Jesus. Whatever it is, whatever your frustration with your parents is, express that to God and ask my favorite question in prayer, what's that about? Like, God, I don't understand why I have the parents I do. Thank you for the good in them, but I don't get this really hard part of this. Like, why did you let this happen? Take that up with God. God is the one who put your particular parents in your life, and you will probably never understand the mystery of why he made that decision. But my goodness, there's space to talk about that with God. There's space to lament what you need to lament. There's space to rejoice over what you need to rejoice over. One of the most powerful healing things you can do is go to God and say, God, I am just not getting what I need from my parents right now. Help me. How would you have me do this? Like, what is this about? Would you teach me? Would you show up in my life? If you pray to God and say, God, like I don't feel seen by my parents. Would you help me feel seen by you? That's some serious faith. That's some serious getting some faith lived in your life. So take up your frustrations with God. So friends, what I want to leave you with before I pray, tonight in your small groups, we're going to give you guys like an hour to talk about your parents. Here's what I would suggest for you. Be so honest. Be so honest. Be so honest about how you experience your parents. Be so honest about that. But try to hold back from going on a rant. Like many of you in the room, you have not had the space to honestly process your relationships with your parents. And so when you start talking about it, it's going to feel like you just have a lot to say. Good. Be honest. What I would just suggest for your soul and to kind of keep honor as an option for you, be honest about the way your parents make you feel. I'm not saying you can't talk about your parents' faults or where they fall short. What I am saying is don't get to the point where you're roasting them. Don't get to the point where you're just ranting and ranting. Show honor even in this moment, but be so honest about how you feel in that relationship. Does that make sense? Sweet. I'm excited for you guys to bring this into the light with each other. I'm excited for you guys to do this in God's presence, to talk about probably the most formative relationships in your life. God, thank you for tonight, Father. I thank you